affected by COVID, this has been a unique and challenging year, and especially for public employees who have been trying to teach remotely and to maintain public health, safety, and welfare for the citizens of Wisconsin. I am Diane Wilsinski, the current chair of the WCOA board. The Wisconsin Coalition of Annuitants consists of statewide and regional organizations representing retirees in the Wisconsin retirement system, and may include active as well as retired participants in the system. The coalition exists to represent all of the approximate 233,804 Wisconsin retirement system retirees of the more than 663,000 system participants. Each member organization designates representatives to attend monthly meetings of the coalition, where guests from the State Investment Board, employee trust funds, legislative leaders, and members of boards and commissions provide input to active discussions on retirement issues. I would like to thank the guest speakers in advance for participating in this event. I would also like to thank our annual meeting committee members, Bob Schaefer, Sandy Drew, Sandy Haas, Roger Springman, Jeannie Stengel, and especially our webmaster, Rick Wojak, for their exceptional efforts in making this happen. As part of this virtual meeting, you will be able to ask questions by pressing the Q&A button that can be found on your screen. Just click on the symbol and type in your question. Roger Springman will be the moderator and will collect the questions and present them to the speakers on your behalf. Speakers will respond to the questions at the end of their presentation. Please do not use the chat button. So our first speaker this morning is Mr. John Volker. John is the current Secretary of the Department of Employee Trust Funds. He served as a Deputy Secretary since 2014. He has been in the WRS for more than 33 years and appreciates the importance of a sustainable benefit program for members, communities, and employers. Welcome, John, and we're glad that you were able to join us.
Well, that's nothing like just in time joining a meeting. Hopefully my technology woes are behind me and the rest of this will be smooth sailing. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we can get this started. Okay. Well, thanks for having me, first of all, and thanks for that nice introduction. I'm proceeding on the assumption that you can see my screen. I'm sure someone will tell me if that is not true. But thanks for having me today. I always like to talk to stakeholders, groups, especially at this time of year when we have the budget pending and a lot of potential changes in the system on the horizon. But if you have a pen and paper in front of you, if you're taking notes on this, I just want you to write down one word as we start this presentation today, and that's service. As you can see, the title of my presentation is Ensuring Our Commitment to Service. But before I talk about our service as the WRS and as the retirement system here at ETF, I really want to talk about your service. Just so happened that last year was Public Service Recognition Week. And it's a good time to reflect and appreciate people that decide to be in public service. And since I'm talking to a coalition of annuitants, I know that you've spent a part of your career in public service. So I just want to start this conversation by saying thank you. Here's a quote from Jack Lew. I think there's no higher calling in terms of a career than public service, which is a chance to make a difference in people's lives and improve the world. I really like that quote, and maybe it's appropriate that I use Jack Lew here today because I think he might have been the Treasury Secretary the last time we were having a debt ceiling showdown. But before I talk about our service, really thank you for all your service that you have done for the people of Wisconsin. So let's talk about our service. So today's word of the day is service. And when I think of ETF and our responsibilities, what does that mean? What is our service to you and what must it include for us to be doing our jobs? And really, it comes down to two primary things. We have to have sustainable benefits for all our members, our 670,000 folks. And then two, we have to have dependable support. And I want to talk about both of those today, and really, where does the WRS and where does ETF stand in relation to our service to you? Are we meeting those two critical criteria? So let's start with sustainable benefits. Clearly, as a pension system, we have to make sure that we're delivering on the promises we made when we said you would get a pension for the rest of your life. So you have to have sustainable benefits. So where does the WRS fall on that? Well, I'm going to ruin the suspense right away, but here is a headline that happened to be in a digital publication called 24/7 Wall Street. And really, as an administrator of a pension system, this is what you would like to see as the headline. Wisconsin has the most secure public pensions in the nation, which is fantastic. That's what you want to see. Not many states can probably say this. Wisconsin is definitely in a unique position. But why would he say that? And what data does he really use to have that very complimentary headline? Well, he uses mainly information that was put together by the Pew Charitable Trust. Now, they've been in the public pension realm here for the last number of years, as more and more public pension systems were called into question about their sustainability as their funding levels went down. And there's still plenty of those public pension systems out there that are struggling financially. They really wanted to dig in and say, what can we provide to the discussion? What can we put out there that tells lawmakers and administrators that a specific pension plan is sustainable? And really, they came up with three different things. One is solvency. And really, are your cash inflows from contributions and investment earnings, are they sufficient to pay those benefits that you have promised without depleting other plan assets? So are you solvent? And as they looked at 50 states, they said, thankfully, all 50 states can say that they're solvent with their pension systems. The next thing you say is, but how are they solvent? Is it a lot of debt that's going into that? So they say, is the sustainable funding practices maintaining or reducing debt? If the answer is yes, then you've reached the debt reduction criteria. And here, unfortunately, we dropped 15 states, so there's only 35 states that meet the test. And then finally, they say, do you have predictable costs? Are you fiscally sustainable by providing benefits that are sufficient to recruit and retain the public workforce? Because that's one of the benefits of having a defined benefit plan. You want to use it to recruit and retain. So are your benefits high enough without compromising other state budget priorities? Meaning, are you having to take a lot out of your budget from year to year to pay for these benefits, not allowing you to do other things, potentially roads, schools, or whatever might be on their priority list? Unfortunately, when we get here, there's only 5 states that passed the test. Thankfully, we can put the WRS in that category. So that's how they determine sustainability. It's likely how the headline came to read, as we're one of the most secure, and maybe the most secure public pension in the country. So Pew has updated this. This came out in 2021, I believe. They've updated it in 2023 in January. They kind of put out this, what I call the sustainability report card for different systems. And here you see on the different criteria that they looked at that we do very well. We only have a 7% of payroll contribution rate for employers. It's relatively low compared to other systems. Our contribution volatility is relatively low, so it's not high one year, low the next year. We're very stable on contributions. We do stress testing, a lot of it, with our actuaries combined with SWIB. We do a variety of things to make sure that we can anticipate what might happen in various scenarios to the WRS, from what happens to contribution rates in certain situations to what might happen to annuity adjustments. But we'll get into that in just a bit. We're fully funded over 100% when they looked at, that's 2020 numbers. Our change in funding ratio has been stable, really only at 6%. Our operating cash flow is in a good position. You might panic and see minus 3.4%, but anything lower than -5 is what they're looking for, and then a positive net amortization. So again, not only the initial review of Wisconsin shows we're sustainable, their ongoing assessment of the WRS shows we continue to be sustainable and maybe the most sustainable pension system in the country. So why is that? Why does the WRS rise to the top when it comes to talking about the fully funded status or the good administration of the system? Well, it's not complicated. I was talking to a legislator earlier this week, having the same discussion about what makes the WRS strong. And I said, it's not complicated. And as she said to me, it sounds like common sense. And that's what it is. It is common sense. What it really means is you have to make this equation balance. You have to make sure your contributions and your investment earnings equal your benefits and payments or your expenses. The thing is that states that struggle being fully funded are messing up one of these letters. Either their actuaries told them that the contribution level should be X, and they decide Y is a better number because they don't want to spend that much on pensions, so they goof up the C. Their investment earnings may not be as high as what they are assuming they will be. So if their assumed rate is artificially high and they consistently don't earn that, they're not going to be fully funded and this equation will not balance. Their benefit payments may be too high. Maybe they've promised certain level of benefits that in any given year, the investment earnings and contributions are not enough to fund that, but they don't adjust the benefits in light of the environment. And then their administrative expenses may be too high. But if we look at the WRS and we dig down into the equation, we can see that we do well on each of the letters of this equation. So our contributions are sufficient. This really just shows you how stable they are. So if you look here and then you go all the way across, you can see that it really is a very stable line between 10 and 15%. Since 1997 all the way through 2021. As an employer, that's what you want to see. You don't want big jumps in contribution rates. What's not shown on this graph, but is of utmost importance to the WRS, is we have a state statute that says any employer that joins into the WRS is mandated to pay the contribution levels as set by the actuaries or as recommended by the actuaries. And we do that. And the actuaries tell us in order to stay fully funded, contributions have to be at this level. And then we tell our employers to pay that. And they do because state law says that they must. So there's really hard to not get this right when the actuaries are telling us exactly how much we need. If we look at investment earnings, this pie chart really shows you nationally where the money comes from. So if you look at investment earnings, this big green part right here is 64%, with the other 36% really having to come from contributions. So that's a fair amount that either the employees or the employers need to pay to keep the system going. But when you take a look at the WRS, you can see a much different picture. We have investment income of 84% into our system, which then means we only have to come up with 16% from contributions. And generally, if we divide that in half, you can see that it's that 7 or 8% area, which keeps that funding level stable for our employers. So the fact that the SWIB has done a nice job of making sure that we have investment income, we're far exceeding what the national average is on how we get money into the system. So that helps on the equation, clearly, when you're getting 84% of your money from the investments. And the bar chart really on the left shows you how those contributions in the purplish color stay very stable as a result of the investment income. And even in a year in 2018, when there was a loss, you can see that the contributions stayed relatively stable. So that is a huge advantage to the WRS. Okay, let's switch sides to the liability side of the equation. Let's start with the expenses. And if we look just at ETF and you look at our expenses, we are very small. So 0.5% of the whole trust fund comes to ETF administrative and other expenses. We've had analyses done in the past. We've brought independent folks, consultants come in and look at us compared to other peer pension systems across the country of our size. And we consistently come in less expensive than other systems. So we are in a good shape on the E part of the equation. All right, so let's look at the big one, the one you're really concerned about because it's benefits. This is what's personally affecting you. This is what's going to go into your pocket as we go forward. And here, the unique thing about the WRS when it comes to benefits is that we kind of have this, for lack of a better term, this sliding scale on what our benefits are. I told you a little bit earlier that some systems promise a certain level of benefits, often called a COLA, and they say 2 or 3% or whatever their number is, and they're guaranteed to pay that every year once you retire. But if you have a bad year investment income, that equation gets off because you have not brought in enough on the equity side of the equation to pay for that benefit that you have promised. So the designers of the WRS said, we want to avoid that. We want to make sure that we always have enough money to pay the benefits, or we're going to change the benefits to meet what the investment side of the equation is. So the unique thing about the WRS is the one feature I get asked about nationally when I travel consistently is how do you do that? And really it comes down to the part of our system that says we will pay an annuity adjustment if the smooth returns, and as you recall, we smooth our returns over 5 years. If that smooth return, that 5-year effective rate is 5% or more, we can pay annuity adjustment. If it's less than 5%, we either don't pay an adjustment or the annuity adjustment may be reduced. The money that you've gotten from annuity adjustments can be reduced. No other state that I'm aware of reduces benefits in times when the equity side of the equation doesn't match up. So that makes us very unique. So how is that played out for folks in the WRS? Now, this is a rather complicated chart, a little busy, but if you look at that smooth rate, that effective rate that I talked about, that 5-year smoothing, that green line right in the middle, that tells you, drives those annuity adjustments. The annuity adjustments are shown as the bar graph in purple. So you can see it ranges from 0 to 7.4% since 2013. And as I said, and I think if you look at 2018, this proves out the design perfectly, is if the smooth rate is 5% or less, we might not pay an annuity adjustment. Sure enough, you look at 2018, we had a bad investment year at -3. The smooth rate drops to 5% there right in the middle of the table. And as a result, there was no annuity adjustment. But then thankfully, SWIB had 3 very strong years. If you look at 19, 15, and 16 investment returns, and then the annuitants start to benefit from those as the smooth rate continues to rise. So, and culminating in 2021, when we see that we paid one of the highest annuity adjustments in, I think, 20 years, because the investment earnings supported that level. Now, of course, 2022 was a difficult year. We were minus 12.9%. You can see how quickly the smooth rate has now come down to 6.5, and that's why the annuity adjustment adjusted to 1.6. So it does have a significant effect on annuitants, but this one cost sharing feature of the WRS is one of the features that is one of the primarily responsible for the strong funding level of the WRS. So what does that mean for keeping up with inflation? So ideally, we want to be fully funded and also make sure annuitants can keep up with inflation. So if you ask me, has it accomplished that? I would have to answer, depends. What year did you retire? So this table really shows us a way to do that analysis. So the analysis says if you started with $1,000 as your core annuity, what would it look like in any given, what would it look like now depending on what year you retired? So let's take 2013, which is the second one here on the list here, 2013. So your annuity is up to $1,319. And your annual rate of increase has been 2.8 and the CPI has been 2.6. So if you ask me and if you've kept up with inflation, I'll say if you retired in 2013, you have. But if you retired in 2018, right above that, you can see that it has not quite kept up. It's in the neighborhood, but has not kept up. And the rest of the years, 2018 is close, but not kept up. 2003 is a little further off, but you go to 1998, again, you're in the ballpark. So while in the ideal state, we keep the system fully funded and we totally keep up with inflation, we haven't quite achieved that. We're close, but we haven't quite achieved that. And I can hear Brian Murphy, our head actuary, whispering in my ear at the moment. Remember, the objective of the WRS is not to keep up with inflation. It's to make sure that it's sustainable and we're able to pay benefits for people for a lifetime. So while close, we're not quite there, but that feature has definitely benefited the WRS over the years. So you're probably thinking, okay, that's enough of history on the benefits. That's fine. What are my annuity adjustments going to be going forward? And that's a legitimate question. So let's dig into that. So we've done some projections here. This table shows you an assumed return from SWIB from the years 2023 all the way through 2026. It shows you what that smooth rate is in the middle, and then shows you on the bottom what the annuity adjustment would be in that year. So if we look at this year, and if SWIB returns 6.8%, which is our assumed rate, that's what our actuaries assume SWIB will make. So if we get 6.8, which is in the neighborhood, definitely a possibility. I think March numbers show them at 4.5%. So that's in the neighborhood. So if that does happen, annuity adjustments would be between 2.5% and 3% this year. But if you look going into the future, they diminish next year, even at 6.8, staying consistent. And in 2025, we're flirting with a negative annuity adjustment because you can see that smooth rate, the 5 years number is starting to come down. And you look at 2026, as we said, we need 5% smooth rate to pay an annuity adjustment. We're not there. So as a result, you can see that we could have a negative annuity adjustment. And the reason for that is we're replacing those double-digit returns that SWIB had so significantly in those 3 years with 6.8. So clearly that the smooth rate will come down. All right, well, let's say it continues to be a difficult year and SWIB earned 0% in 2023. What does that mean for annuity adjustments? Even if they bounce back to 6.8 in future years. Well, even if it's 0 this year, and 0, I guess, is in the realm of possibility, considering we could get into a recession at some point this year. It's a little debate about if that will happen, but if that would happen and it's not a soft landing, it's a little harder landing, we get to 0%, where it would be an adjustment in 2023, it would go to 0 next year, even with that 6.8, and then again turn negative in 2025 and 26, but a little more significant negative than if they would get 6.8 this year. So if SWIB gets 0 this year, but would get 10 or 12% in 2024 as a bounce back year, then these numbers would clearly change. But if they get 0 this year and get back to 6.8, we would be looking at, again, negative annuity adjustments in 2025 and 26. But what if, we always like to say, what is the bad number, as I call it? How bad do returns need to be for us to be an annuity adjustment in the current year? So we look at that, and from our projections, it would have to be 11%. So let's say there's no agreement on the debt ceiling and we get into a recession and it's not a soft landing, maybe we get to minus 11. I wouldn't anticipate that happening, but looking at this, you'd have 2 double-digit negative years in a row from SWIB. There would be no annuity adjustment in 2023. And then we have some fairly significant negative annuity adjustments from 24 through 26 if they even get back, if they got back to the 6.8 going forward. So that is not a scenario we like to talk about, but one, as I said earlier, we're always doing stress testing to understand implications to the system. This is one mini stress test we continue to look at, but we'd have to be at minus 11 for 0% increase this year. So as we sum up the equation, we talk about the WRS, we can see we're in very good shape. We have consistently paid required contributions. We have a high percentage of income from investment earnings. We have risk sharing on benefit levels, especially when it comes to annuities. They adjust based on the amount of income into the system. And we have low expenses. And when you do that, when you implement a system consistent with that equation, a lot of good things happen. One is you're financially strong. And a lot of people like to talk about this as the WRS because we're unique, not many fully funded pension systems in the country. You can see we've hovered right around 100% for years. Now, we know that that 106% you see in 2021 will likely come down in 2022 once we get all the numbers in on the implications of that minus 12.9% investment earnings. But again, because the system adjusts based on the income side of the equation, I suspect us to still be right around 100%. So not only are you financially strong, you also provide a low cost plan to your taxpayers. This analysis done by the National Association of State Retirement Administrators show that state and local governments in Wisconsin spend just 2.1% of their budgets on the pension system, which is great. You know, we're not horning in on other priorities in the budget when only 2.1% of their budget is going to pensions. So that's another benefit of effectively putting the equation into place. You can see we're much lower than the national average. Other state and local governments are paying over 5% to their pension systems, and some much higher if they're trying to catch up for poorly funded decisions in the past. And not only do you have low cost and you're financially strong, but you're also supporting the Wisconsin economy. This is an analysis done by the National Institute on Retirement Security. They show for every dollar we pay out to an annuitant, $1.29 comes back into the economy. So you're supporting your local communities. And if you look at the taxpayer investment factor, every dollar the taxpayers are putting in, we're getting over $8 back into the economy. So not only do we provide a great service for public servants to have a pension system into the future, promise benefits into the future, we also are not a burden on taxpayers, and we're helping the economy. So a lot of great benefits come from having a very strong system. So some of you might be asking, well, there's a lot of talk about Milwaukee, and Milwaukee might be coming into the system. In fact, there was a bill passed last night that would do that. What is that going to do to the WRS? We don't want to waste all our good work by bringing on Milwaukee, who has had some struggles and will continue to have some struggles in their pension funding. Well, let's talk about that. So Assembly Bill 245 actually passed the Assembly last night. I'm sure Tarna is on this meeting and she was watching it very carefully. I was getting emails into the night with play-by-play on what was happening. But as we look at this bill, it does bring Milwaukee City and County into the WRS. But the key feature here is it requires only newly hired city and county employees to be enrolled in the WRS. It'll be about 1,250 city per year and about 450 county employees each year would gradually come into the WRS. The big part, and thankfully we've been consulted by the legislators working on this bill for a number of months, and they have listened to us. We've had actuarial work done for them. They're very concerned about making sure that the WRS stays strong. As a result, the city and county governments are going to be responsible for the existing unfunded liability. So the city and county are not fully funded systems. They are about to have some high increases in their contribution rates in the coming years based on the way they have approached administering their system. We do not want to be in a position where we're bringing any of that unfunded liability into the WRS. We do not want to wreck, as I say, all the good work that's been done on the WRS over the past number of years. And why am I not concerned about the city and county coming in? Let's just return to the equation, back to the simple equation. Contributions, those will be set by us in cooperation with our actuaries. And as like any other employer in the state, Milwaukee will be required to pay what we tell them. So there will be no shortchanging the contributions. The money, just like all the money we get from contributions now in the WRS, will be invested by SWIB, consistent with our funding policy. The benefits are not going to be unique to Milwaukee, so there won't be anything that's potentially raising the benefit liability. It's going to be WRS benefits. So city and county Milwaukee employees will have the exact same benefit levels anybody else and the WRS has. So we know we can fund that. We know how to set contributions for that. So that will not affect the normal cost of the plan either. And again, the expenses will be administered by us, so we'll continue to keep your costs low. So wrapping up the first part of making sure we provide service to you, sustainability should not be a question in your mind. The WRS is in a very strong position. We have a lot of tools in place to keep us in a strong position, and Milwaukee County and the city coming into the plan should not affect that at all. Okay, so let's go into the next part of what I told you the criteria is for providing service, and that is dependable support. We have to provide everybody in our system dependable support. So what does that mean? So what does dependability mean? So that sounds great, dependable support, but what does that mean for ETF? And as I look at it, it really means in a very high level, these 6 things. One, we need to calculate benefits accurately. We have to make sure people get what they earned. Years of service, their high 3 years, any complications or complexity, depending on how many of the employers they had, we have to make sure we calculate those benefits accurately. 2, we have to pay that right amount. And once we calculate it, we have to make sure our systems get it right and we pay that amount to our annuitants. 1, we have to make sure that payments arrive at the bank on the first of the month. Now, I know there may be questions. It arrives at the bank on the first of the month. Why don't you get it in your bank account on the first of the month? But it is because it's not a business day if it comes on a Sunday or a holiday. So we have to kind of lean on the banks, and they don't necessarily make those on non-business days. So, but nonetheless, if it's not getting there on the first or second or third, depending on the situation, I think we're going to get a lot of calls from folks. I know we've had a few situations where banks have had a few glitches in their IT systems and delayed payments by a few hours into people's accounts, and our call center gets very busy very quickly. So of course, we have to be dependable and make sure you get paid when you expect to get paid. We have to ensure health insurance benefits and payments are handled effectively. We have to provide you with expert guidance when you need it. There's a lot of questions about my benefit level, my taxes, my health insurance. Those are things we should be experts in and guide you so you make the most advantage or the best decision for you. And of course, we need to keep your personal information safe. We have a lot of personal information. We have 670,000 people roughly. We have your social security number. We have your health insurance information if you're a state employee and a few locals. All that information needs to be kept secure, especially when you're talking about this day and age. Okay, so that's what it means to be dependable. And I'd say we do a pretty good job right now of that. We pay people the right amount. We calculate things accurately. So what does dependability not look like? So what, if we weren't doing our job, what might it not look like? I would propose, we don't deal in luggage, but this is what it would look like. Now, this is a picture of the after effects of Southwest's meltdown over the holidays. It started out with a bad storm and a lot of airlines had problems, but other airlines adjusted very quickly and were able to get things straightened out within a day or so. Southwest Airlines struggled in that regard. As a result, they ended up with this pile of luggage in whatever airport this happens to be. So people start asking the question, so why was Southwest so much different than the rest of the airline industry in regrouping after the storm? And there was a clear theme to that. If you look at CNN, there was aging, outdated technology leaves air travel at risk of a meltdown. The Dallas Morning News, where Southwest is headquartered, holiday meltdown exposes Southwest Airlines technology woes. If you look at the industry publications, Carrier Management says Southwest Airlines is discovering the true cost of outdated technology. And of course, the lawyers got to get involved when you have this type of event. And law.com, warnings from Southwest meltdown. Old software creates legal risks. And it does. When you have old software, outdated technology, your business risks go up significantly. For any organization that is using outdated technology, these are the business risks you are taking on. And as days go on and years go on, you continue to use that outdated technology. Here's what you're facing as a business. You can have crashes or system failures. The volume for Southwest of pilots trying to get in to find out what their assignment is was too much. They're using an old technology. It's called the telephone instead of anything else in order to reassign pilots. As a result, they had pilots at an airport ready to fly, but the system couldn't tell them they were there, so they had to cancel the flights. So you could have crashes, system failures. I always talk about service interruptions. You have increased costs because updating and maintaining old software is expensive, and it gets more expensive as the years go on. You have decreased productivity because the system is not as good as modern systems. You have security weaknesses, keeping old systems up to date and protected against breaches or people getting into the system becomes more difficult. And as the Southwest slide showed, legal and regulatory compliance risks are there as well. For instance, if the IRS changes some IRS form, which they recently did, that puts a lot of work on our systems to make sure that we can comply with that. In some cases, systems will not be able to accommodate what the changes are. So you could be at risk of not being non-compliance with the WRS. So those are the business risks you take when you're operating on outdated technologies. So what does that mean for ETF? And talking about dependable support, we don't really want to be taking those business risks, and we do have outdated technology. If I return to those 6 criteria of dependable support, let's look at calculate benefits accurately. We have 2 systems that generally help us do that. One is 36 years old, one is 24 years old. The system that's 36 years old happens to be the system that includes everybody's data, years of service, earnings, all that information we need to calculate benefits accurately. It's 36 years old. So clearly we are taking a business risk in operating that long of a system. If we skip down to ensure payments arrive at the bank, our benefit payment system is 14 years old. Again, if that would happen to fail, that means payments would not get to the bank on time. I really don't want to be sitting in this chair on the day that happens for a lot of reasons, but that is a business risk that we take and one we definitely want to mitigate. Ensure health insurance benefits and payments are handled effectively. That's a 12-year-old system. Provide expert guidance. Thankfully, our people are not outdated. They will always be here to provide you expert guidance. But keep your personal information safe. As I said before, that gets more and more difficult the older your systems are. So we clearly have some increase in business risk as we continue to operate our business with outdated technology. The good news is we are making some progress in this regard. It's been a focus of ETF over the last few years. We're making good progress in that regard. We put a data management program into place. That's not I guess the sexiest thing to talk about, but having good data, accurate data is very important to us, and making sure any new systems we bring on are using good, accurate data. So we are building a data warehouse and really making sure that our data quality is in a good place. So we're made a lot of progress there. We implemented one new system already in November of 2021. It's our enterprise content management system. That is a system that allows us to capture, store, and retrieve various documents that you send us. So we have it all in the system. That way our call center can see anything you have filed. Other people that work in the agency can also see what's there that you have filed with us. It also makes us more efficient. I talked about productivity. We are more productive because we have a modern system now doing this function. Our insurance administration system, I talked about that being 12 years old. We are in the middle of putting in a new system in that regard to reduce that business risk. We've got a vendor we're already testing with the University of Wisconsin. That's going well. We're engaged with our other employers on that. We are anticipating that this system will be implemented in the summer of next year. So that also will reduce some of our business risk as we get another modern system online. And then finally, we're doing a lot of stuff building our IT infrastructure to make sure we're supporting all these new systems that we're bringing into the agency. So our modernization journey looks like this. You can see the insurance administration system takes up a lot of space on this timeline. That's the ongoing effort at the moment, as well as continuing to work on our data. As soon as the insurance administration gets to a spot where we're implementing, we need to buy a pension system. And that will be a huge lift because not only will it be expensive, but it's a big system to put in. As you can imagine, any system that's going to come in, understand our benefits, be able to calculate our benefits, communicate with members, and keep all 670,000 accounts straight is a complex system. And we're going to buy that system from the 3, 4, or 5 vendors out there that sell these type of systems. So that's where we're going. So we're making progress. Yes, we have some business risks, and we're chipping away at reducing those business risks by adding systems. And we're on a cusp of getting to the big lift, which is the pension system. But as you might imagine, whenever you're doing modernization and needing to modernize an agency, it comes with some cost. And that's why I continue to talk about our biennial budget request. One word I like to use with Joint Finance Committee members when I meet with them is, this is all about dependability. The WRS has a great reputation. We're dependable, we do our job, we're fully funded. We want to continue to do that. So our budget request this year, while larger than in many past years, is really a way for us to continue to be dependable. And dependable means that we need money to support our outdated technology. I just went into the risks that we're facing with our outdated technology. We need to do something about it. So we've asked for 7 new positions, some technical, some others, but we need 7 new positions, more resources in the agency to help us put the new pension system into place. We've also asked for money. So we need money for these systems. So we asked for $15 million in the first year of the biennium, and we asked for $19 million in the second year of the biennium. That largely goes to pay for the new systems that we're putting into place. Largely of that 15 and 19 million goes to buy this new pension system that I've talked about. Sometime next year, we'll be looking at putting an RFP out on the street for vendors to bid on to provide us a pension administration system. We know from consultants in the industry that have a good handle on what's going on in the market. They predict that the cost of a system to service the size and complexity of the WRS will cost us between $60 and $70 million. So we need to start building up money in our budget, so to speak, so we can pay the vendor for that system. And that's where largely the $15 million and $19 million will be going. So that's the technology. That's one big business risk we have. The other part is we need to keep providing dependable support by ensuring that we are providing critical customer service. Back to the word I told you to write down at the beginning, service. So here, in my opinion, our service levels have dropped to the point that we can't drop any further. We need to add more resources to make sure we're servicing, like I said, the 600 and almost 70,000 folks. So we've asked for 7 new positions. These folks all are customer facing. They will either be answering the phone, dealing to folks with their retirement counseling, or dealing with our employers. So all of them are customer facing, and we need to do that because of the increase in volume we have continued to see over the last number of years. And when I talk about increase in volume, I'm really talking about the retiree population has increased almost 42% over the last decade. You might say, so, okay, but they were members before, now they're just retirees. How come you need more support to support that increase? And the bottom line is when people are active employees, they usually ask a lot of their benefit questions to their HR. And they don't ask us necessarily during their active career. Once they retire, that totally changes. We become your payroll office, we become your human resources office, and we have a lot more questions to answer. So when you get a 42% increase without additional resources to support that, you can imagine that that could stress the system. And it's stressing our system at the moment. Our average speed of answer in the call center is not meeting our performance standard at the moment. And I want to make sure we get back there, especially as we potentially have new employees from Milwaukee joining the system, and Milwaukee as an employer joining the system. We need to be in a position to make sure we're providing good critical customer service to you as a member. We've also asked for two new positions, one in the financial arena to make sure our accounting stays accurate and up to date with the different accounting standards that are out there, and then an actuarial position to make sure the data we give to the actuaries and the work that the actuaries provide us is reviewed and monitored and provide oversight, because clearly that's an essential part of what we do here. So going back to that first word that I said at the beginning of the presentation, service. So we want to make sure we have sustainable benefits. We're in a good position there. We want to make sure we're providing dependable support. We have work to do there. We do a good job, but we need to reduce our business risks because of the technology. The funding that we've asked for will be essential for us to be able to do that. I've had good conversations with members of Joint Finance. I don't know what they're going to do, but I think they understand the position that we're in. And I do want to take a time out here just for a moment. And I understand that someone from the Coalition of Annuitants actually testified in favor of our budget during a listening session in Minocqua. So I really appreciate when stakeholders are stepping up and advocating for a system that really warms my heart. And so fortunate that you are willing to do that. Standing in line or putting your name on a list can take hours for an event like Joint Finance does. And the fact that someone from the coalition would actually do that I'm very grateful for that. So thank you. And for anything else anybody has done, from writing letters, talking to your legislator, just things I may not be aware of, really thank you for doing that. It really makes a big difference that legislators hear from people other than me about the needs of ETF. So that's the position we're in when it comes to making sure we're providing service. So I'll leave you, since I talked about service being the critical word of the day, let me leave you with this quote. Your success will always be measured by the quality and quantity of service you render. I love this quote. I think it applies to a variety of things. I personally think it applies to people in public service. I like to live kind of my life based on this quote individually, but I think it also applies to ETF and the WRS as well. Our success will be measured by the quality and quantity of service we render to you. And we're making every effort we can to make sure that we do that effectively going forward. So with that, I will stop my presentation. And I understand you have a mechanism to get questions to me. If I haven't answered those during my presentation, I'm here to try to address anything you have.
Thank you, John, for your appreciate the chat and the information. I think all of us that are watching really care how well you guys are doing. So we'll do what we can. I do have some questions for you. The first one is are reductions in public service employee numbers a concern to the WRS funding projections?
Not at the moment, because we annually look at that, and then our actuaries dig into the various demographic assumptions that we use to fund the system and how we determine contribution rates, et cetera. We're always looking at people leaving the system and people joining the system. The trend of folks leaving has not gotten to a level that is of concern to us. And just as I talked about the plan design will adjust to that as we move forward. it could put a little upward pressure on contributions, but the equation will adjust for it as we move forward.
Okay. Next question, and you've answered this in part already. How might Milwaukee City and County employees joining WRS affect its future?
Yeah, so if you look at this, we've had a number of new employers join the system over the last number of years. And nobody brought it up because they're generally small. But the key is, as I indicated, when you bring in a new employer, there's certain rules from my perspective that need to be followed. And the rules that need to be followed is you have to pay your fair share, and you don't get any special treatment with benefits, because once you start to do that, you can start affecting the normal cost of the WRS. But as the bill is written now, that would bring Milwaukee in those 1,700 new people a year. We know that they will be just like any other employer and be required to pay the required contributions. So the actuaries have done an analysis for us and have indicated to us that it has very minimal impact on the normal cost of the WRS by bringing in new employees. If your question was, what if we were bringing in some of the legacy debt that's been created by Milwaukee's implementation of their pension? I would not be calm at the moment. Bringing in this other debt into a system that has worked so hard to be fully funded would be a problem for us. We're very fortunate that we have created, and Tarna specifically has created, a very effective working relationship with folks in the Capitol at the moment. And anything that comes up related to Milwaukee coming into the system, they dutifully send to us and say, what do you think? And thankfully, they've listened. Not only do they ask you, but it's always nice if they respond once you give them information. I believe we asked for them to make some changes to the bill, and those were included in the amendment that was part of the bill passing last night. Is just a good indication that we're representing the system. We're making sure that we stay fully funded, and they're listening to us. So I think in the long run, bringing Milwaukee in helps the WRS because we're one big system. And it also, over time, hopefully alleviates Milwaukee's debt in their system. So I think it's a good spot. We're going to have to adjust to the WRS will be affected by the new employees. So we're going to have more workload at ETF, which gets us back to make sure we can make some efficiencies with the technology and making sure we get some additional positions to service not only the new employees, but the city and county as an employer will probably be a heavy lift for us. So it will have workload, but I think financially the actuaries are telling us has very minimal cost on the system.
Okay, I'll jump a question here. Why were existing Milwaukee employees excluded?
I think they were excluded because it becomes more difficult to achieve what I just talked about. They're coming with previous benefit promises, different benefit levels, et cetera. And once you bring in a group, the beauty about the WRS is everybody in the WRS has the same benefit package. You're might different based on your class of employee as a protective versus a general, but everybody's has the same benefit level. If we were to bring existing employees in, not only would they bring the legacy debt that has been built up in the current system, and as I said at the beginning of this, one of the things that the Pew looked at is how do you fund your system without increasing debt? You shouldn't be doing that. Bringing existing employees in could increase the debt that the WRS has. We don't want to do that. And then you combine that with the fact that they've had a different benefit level and will expect those benefits going forward, and they might do those benefits going forward based on they've vested into a system that promises them a certain level of benefits. We wouldn't be able to accommodate that, or we wouldn't want to accommodate that because those benefits might not be fully funded. So a combination of reasons. One, it becomes very complex, but in my mind, the main thing is we risk bringing additional legacy debt into the WRS, which has worked so hard to make sure that we don't build up debt and that we stay fully funded. So that's why we were advocating from the beginning when we knew this discussion was happening, that if they want to bring Milwaukee in, that we would probably only support the idea of bringing new employees in, because then we get to start from scratch and we know we're at a level playing field with the rest of the WRS participants.
I think there is a historical factor in there also, that Milwaukee County and city chose not to join the WRS when we first established it. So there are two questions here regarding the variable fund. Has ETF considered publishing on our website or in your print publication independent advice that older annuitants should seek a more stable source for their pensions, core fund, rather than stock-only funds that are more volatile, variable? Many state annuitants do not use personal finance advisors and do not realize they should be reevaluate as they get older. And the other question is what are your thoughts about staying in the variable fund once you retire?
Well, the first one is relatively easy. We can't provide financial advice. We're not certified to do that. Would be outside our role. We're experts at benefits, but your personal financial situation is unique to you. And people go to a lot of school and a lot of training to do that. We would probably get called on the carpet if we were providing financial advice to folks regarding what they should do. So that's why we stay away from that. We're happy to tell you the implications of being in the variable. If you do it, this will be your annuity adjustment, or this is the volatility of it. But really, we can't provide you advice on what you should do. So we'll always stay away from that because we're not qualified to provide that advice. We can give you expert guidance on benefits, which we do effectively, but we're not experts in your personal financial arena. The same thing, it's similar to the second part of that question is, what should you do after you retire? Again, that is unique to every individual. One person X, let's say, has retired. They had 15 years of service. Their WRS is going to provide about 40 or 50% of their earnings before they retired, but they also have a very large deferred comp. They've done a really good job of putting money away in the 457 plan. And that will actually provide them more to their retirement than their actual WRS. So a person like that may want to take a little more risk when they retire because more of their money is coming from a different source. Unlike somebody that maybe relies on their WRS for 60 or 70% of their income, may not be in a position where they should be taking that risk. So it's hard for us to say, once you retire, you should do this, because everybody's unique situation kind of leads into what decisions they could make. If you can withstand the risk of the variable, because you have other sources of money, Social Security, supplemental savings, that doesn't make you not sleep at night because you're worried about what the return might be on the variable, then be in the variable. If you have your different savings, Social Security or supplemental, but you worry about what's happening with the variable, then maybe you have to reconsider if you should be in it. But everybody's situation will be different, and it's hard for us to give guidance. We shouldn't give guidance. We're not qualified to give guidance, but it really comes down to your personal situation. And I think you really, my best advice is ask yourself, can you tolerate the risk that comes with the variable fund? And some people are going to answer yes, then they could stay in it. Some people, if they answer no, should get out.
Okay, thank you very much. Next one, have administrative costs decreased with a rise of remote work and other changes?
Yeah, our overhead is down. So when people talk about um, remote work and hybrid work environment, I always say, just like I talked, a good portion of my discussion today was about business and what's the good business decision. And as I look at the hybrid work or remote work, for me, it's a business decision. So, and the things I look at when it comes to making a business decision on this is, one, what's productivity? Is productivity the same or better than it was when we were all in the office? For ETF, the answer has been yes, it's the same, and in some cases better. Two, does remote work help me retain and recruit people into ETF so I can get the best people working for us? The answer there is yes as well. Right now, in this tight labor market, flexibility, in addition to compensation, is one of the big things people are looking for. By us offering some form of remote work, depending on what business unit you are in at ETF, it allows us to recruit and retain folks. So that's a good business decision as well. And then finally, does it help you lower your overhead? And it does for us because we're giving up a floor of this new building. We started with 3 floors at ETF in this new building. And a result of remote work, we are giving 1 floor back to the Department of Administration. And shortly, I believe in August, we'll no longer be paying rent there. So we'll save about $500,000 a year in overhead. We will no longer be paying rent on that. So we will reduce overhead. So remote work is not only a good business decision, because of the things I mentioned, but yes, it is reducing some of our administrative expenses because of lower rent.
Okay, thank you. Next one, are you satisfied with your current staffing levels?
No,
Maybe proposed.
I'm not. That's why you can see we've asked for 16 people in the budget for a variety of reasons for us to move forward. For us to transform and modernize the agency, we're going to need additional folks. 16 sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. I think some of our folks said we probably need a little bit more than that. But if we could get the 16 that are in our budget, I'd feel a lot better on where we are as far as the workforce at ETF. It would give me a lot more confidence that we will be able to move forward, implement new systems, reduce some of these business risks that we have. And I've been remiss. I mean, these new systems not only reduce business risk, which is the first thing I think of, but it also improves service to our customers. Right now, you can't go online and look at an account. You can't go online and potentially file a change to your beneficiary form or any other form that you're required to file with us. These new systems allow us to do that. As soon as the pension system is in place, you'll be able to see your account. You'll be able to interact with us. If you so choose to get service through the computer instead of the phone, you'll be able to do that. You really can't do that now to any great extent. So I want us to get there, not only for the business risk reason, but also to make sure our members are getting the very best service. To get there, we need more workforce to get those systems in. And we're going to need a little more workforce to support Milwaukee, as every year we're going to get another 1,700 folks into the system that we're going to have to support. So not totally satisfied, but it would go a long way for us to get those 16 positions I asked for in the budget.
Okay, thank you. What is the status of the legal action with Vitech over the failure to provide the contracted for software?
So it is still in litigation, is in the Dane County Circuit Court. We are in a position where we have more or less finished discovery, and now we're just waiting for a potential trial date to be set in the event there can't be a settlement worked out between then and the trial date. So that trial date has not been yet set.
Okay, I'm gonna switch around here. Next one is for new retiree. What is the lowest monthly annuity if annual adjustment negative will impact the future annual adjustments?
You're gonna have to repeat that one. I'm a little
All right.
confused with the questions.
For new retiree,
Yeah.
what is lowest monthly annuity if annual adjustment negative? Will this impact future annual adjustments?
Okay, so as you retire, you get a floor, right? That's what we call your floor. Whatever we pay you on the first day when you retire, you'll never get less than that from the core. So if you retire and your benefit is $2,000 a month, you will get $2,000 a month at a minimum until you die or your spouse dies or whatever might be the case. If we have a negative annuity adjustment, let's say this year or next year, you'll still get $2,000. What will affect is building up on top of that $2,000. You'll have to wait for that to happen potentially, which the effect is you get a slower start on keeping up with inflation, right? So the idea is the annuity helps dilute the impact of inflation on you. If you retire this year, and let's say we get zero, like I said in that projection, it's only a 1% increase this year, and then negative or zero going forward, you're not really making any gains on inflation because you're not going to get much added to your base or your floor annuity. So the real impact is you get a slow start on keeping up with inflation, and you don't get to add to your annuity in subsequent years right away. Like a lot of people have retired, and the first year after they retire, they get more money. And then the second year after they retire, they get more money on top of that. So that would be the impact on newly retired folks is you kind of get a slower start on adding to your floor. In essence, the bottom line is you're slower to keep up with inflation. The likelihood you'll keep up with inflation the first 5 years is less than if you would start getting annuity adjustments right after you retire.
All right, next one has to do with the legislature. When is the Committee on Joint Finance going to consider the ETF budget? ACE is working with individual members out of state to contact their legislators about the importance of tech and customer service requests, and knowing the status of this request would be helpful to us.
I agree it would be helpful, and if I knew, I would tell you. So we keep asking the question, we can't get anybody to tell us the answer. So I'm sorry, I wish I could tell you. We're very curious as well, but they are holding it very close to the vest. We're pretty much learning when you're up, like a week before you're up. So that's what we're experiencing now. So really can't tell you. I wish we knew, but I appreciate people's efforts. Just continue to go until we're up.
All
Is my
right.
best advice.
That's the only way we can do it, I guess. There is another one came under, not in the Q&A, but in the chat. A person would like to know, better understand the difference between United Healthcare Medicare Advantage Plan and HMO plans. Specifically, if an annuitant selected the United Healthcare Medicare Advantage Plan, would that annuitant be able to switch back to an HMO plan without evidence of insurability?
I believe you can do it during open enrollment. I don't think you need insurability, but the best way to get the most accurate answer to that question is call our call center, people that are well-trained. But you can go back, and I think you're going to now have a presentation after me on Medicare Advantage, so that might help you with that question even more. But if you have questions after that, call the call center. They will quickly answer your question so you know what direction you go. But you can always change during open enrollment.
All right, we have one last question that came in.
You guys are giving me a workout today.
Yes. Are Milwaukee City County employees required to live in the county while employed? Years ago they were. I don't think that's anything you guys have control
of. I do not know the answer, and it does not matter to us.
And that was my last question that I have. And thank you very much for your answers and your time.
All right, always appreciate being able to talk to folks with the coalition. So just let me know and I can be of assistance in the future.
Okay, thanks, John.
So again, John, thank you very much for being here. We always look forward to your presentation and the good information you give us. So our next speaker is Dr. Ed Weisbart, the National Board Secretary and Missouri Chapter Chair of Physicians for a National Health Program, which is a nonpartisan organization of more than 25,000 physicians and other healthcare advocates. Dr. Weisbart has an extensive history of success across a variety of healthcare environments with a strong focus on strategic planning, medical group leadership, and a much longer list that I'm not going to go into. So at this time, I would like to turn this over to Dr. Weisbart. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Diane. You can hear me, yes? Good. Okay. So yeah, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Roger and Arlene Larson for inviting me and for the help Roger and Arlene gave me on putting this understanding your benefit program. And actually, I want to thank your last speaker as well, because I had some questions about your program that he helped me understand. The biggest one I had that he helped me understand was, wow, your benefit design looks really generous, really rich. Now I understand how Wisconsin's able to do that. So, I think, we should blow his horn more. He was what he said. It's really impressive what you all have accomplished and the stability that you're able to continue to bring. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm Ed Weisbart. I'm a family physician in St. Louis, practiced 20 years in Chicago, and moved to St. Louis to work at Express Scripts as chief medical officer, a pharmacy benefit manager, and for the last 10 years or so, I've been, I retired from that, and I've been working or volunteering with this group called Physicians for a National Health Program. So we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan 501c3. I'm not paid to be here. I'm not paid by PNHP. I'm just here because I want to, and I'm glad to talk to you about some issues that I think a lot of folks need to understand and which can be confusing, but I will do my best to make that not confusing. Our organization's philosophy is that Medicare itself is a really darn good program. It's got some imperfections, some flaws, some problems, which we will talk about a bit. And our organization's concept is we should fix those problems and make Medicare even better. And then, we have it better like that, offer it to everybody. So that's sort of our mission. But today, let me put up my screen sharing. Today, the topic is more specifically about this, about Medicare Advantage, which is, I think, a really important thing for you all to understand. And I'm going to be comparing that to Medicare gap programs. And we'll explain a bit about why all of that's important and some things that I think you need to understand. So why should you care about this? And the reason I think you should care about this and people with whom you work is because, it looks like these are just some simple choices, but some of the traps embedded in these decisions are sort of obscured, and I want to help you understand it. So I am not expert at your benefit design, although I have studied it the last little bit here. And as I understand it, the way that it works when you retire is your banked sick time gets paid out in the form of being able to pay for your healthcare benefits. And there's two major choices and then a whole slew of other ones that exist and look interesting, but are not the dominant choices people make. It's either Medicare Plus, which is what I call Medigap, and it's one of the more generous Medigap or rich Medigap programs that I've seen, or the other large group of folks go into Medicare Advantage programs. And so that works just, the way it's supposed to. And then when you exhaust your banked time, as I understand it, you remain in traditional Medicare Parts A and B. So you'll hear me use the phrase traditional Medicare. You'll hear other folks use the phrase original Medicare. Those are synonyms. If you're confused by that, be not confused. Those are synonyms. And they both refer to the parts of Medicare that were created in 1965 when Medicare was enacted. Part A, as you know, covers hospital care largely. Part B covers outpatient care largely. So parts A and B are what I call, and most folks call, traditional or original Medicare. Those are all synonyms. Medicare Advantage was created a little bit later, essentially Medicare Part C. So those are synonyms. And then there's a range of supplemental plans that have their own acronyms. So when you exhaust your bank sick time and you no longer have the direct access to Medicare Plus and the other United Medicare Advantage plan that goes through your, the retirement program, then you have a choice. You go onto the marketplace like I did, and you can purchase Medigap on your own. You can go on the marketplace and join into a Medicare Advantage plan, which we'll talk more about, or you could do nothing and you could just risk going bare and only having Medicare Parts A and B and not having Medigap and not joining Medicare Advantage. And I would discourage anyone from that third choice, particularly because you're really exposing yourself to bankruptcy, medical bankruptcy. So we'll talk more about that. So let's unpack this. How does this work? So first we'll start with traditional Medicare. Traditional Medicare operates with a literally 2% overhead, no profit, of course, and a 2% overhead. And so you pay your money to the federal government, and then the federal government, of course, gives you your precious red, white, and blue Medicare card that some folks say they hold on to for dear life. And then Medicare directly pays physicians and hospitals for your services. It's, of course, more complex than that, but that's essentially how it works. You pay your taxes, and perhaps you're part of the premium, and then Medicare pays your doctors and hospitals. Medicare Advantage does not have a 2% overhead. Instead, it's got a much larger overhead, and it's considerably different. As you know, there's a range of things on here, a range of companies doing it, and the one that runs your Medigap plan and your Medicare Advantage plan this year, as I understand it, is United. And so all around the country, there's this suite of insurance companies that offer Medicare Advantage. And the way this works is that it's quite different from traditional Medicare. We still, of course, pay our taxes and to the federal government, but then rather than the federal government paying doctors and hospitals directly, instead they pay the insurance companies on your behalf. And they actually prepay the insurance companies. So the insurance companies it's called capitation. They get a certain dollar amount per person per month that's enrolled with them. So they're prepaid a flat amount, whether you use a lot of healthcare or whether you don't use a lot of healthcare. You can see the business model I'm going to allude to in a moment, but they do that. And then they each pay doctors and hospitals on our behalf. So already you can see it's more complicated than the straightforward system, and complexity is expensive and bewildering. And it's even a little bit more complex than this simple cartoon in that they, of course, tell you can go to this doctor and not that doctor. We want you to go to this hospital and not that hospital. So we're essentially paying them to tell us which ones we can't use. Now, your Medicare Advantage plan, as I understand it, one of the examples of it being, a rich benefit design is it doesn't really do that. My understanding is your Medicare Advantage plan does let you go to anybody who takes Medicare in the country, so that's good. But of course, it's not quite that simple, as I understand it. If you go to a physician or hospital who's not in the United network of Medicare Advantage, you can still do that, but it's more lugubrious. You have to come up with some of the upfront costs and then kind of get reimbursed. And then there's a whole negotiated process. And as I understand it, a lot of folks try to just stay within the United network because it's too onerous to deal with it. But outside of your plan, most Medicare Advantage plans in the country, actually say, no, we're not going to pay if you go out of network, or we'll pay, a fraction of the amount. So it's a much more complicated system. And that complexity creates problems that you need to be aware of. The first is that since they are prepaid for your care, they have the legal authority to require you to ask them for permission to do things. So Medicare Advantage plans, traditional Medicare almost never does any of these called prior authorizations or other things. Traditional Medicare just doesn't hardly ever do that, whereas Medicare Advantage plans, as we know, really rely upon their ability to say no to care. It's of course done within the guise of we cover anything that's medically necessary, but what one person might think is medically necessary might not be the same as what someone else might think is necessary. And so there's a whole process in there. And regardless of whether it meets medical necessity criteria for them, they certainly have the ability to take time doing those prior authorizations. So if you call, your whatever place for care, And they ask you, first question is, what kind of insurance do you have? And you say you have traditional Medicare with Medigap. They'll give you the appointment tomorrow and not expect any barriers. But if you say, well, I've got Medicare Advantage, then if it's an expensive procedure, the vendor, the doctor, the hospital will probably want to delay giving you the appointment until they've had a chance to work with the managed care company, United in your case, to make sure that they will get paid. And typically that takes several days. So regardless of whether they ultimately approve it, that often does really kind of delay your access to care. We talked a bit about networks. We're going to talk a bit more about networks, and it looks like your plan is generous in that way, although it does have those barriers as we talked about. Because they are prepaid, a flat capitated dollar amount. As I said, if you're getting a lot of healthcare, they view you as a liability, and if you're not getting a lot of healthcare, well, then you're an asset, so to speak. So they get paid the same amount, whether you're there's a gaming opportunity to make you look sicker and to get paid more if you're sicker, but there's a whole game with that. But generally, the healthier you are, the more they want you in Medicare Advantage so that they can get their capitation and yet not have any actual medical claims to pay. And the sicker you are, the less interested they are in having you there for that reason. As I alluded to, traditional Medicare has a 2% overhead. The insurance industry, Medicare Advantage specifically, averages something like 15% of what we spend goes to overhead and profits. And unlike Medicare, traditional Medicare, the Medicare Advantage companies, including United, are rife with accusations, fines, and multi-million-dollar settlements for fraud and for other similar problems. They seldom go to trial and get convicted, because if you're convicted of fraud, you may find it harder to be able to participate in a federally funded program. But accusations and settlements for fraud are rife in this industry. So I alluded at the beginning to interest in traditional Medicare Parts A and B. What's so great about that? I'm sure you know some of that, but let me sort of unpack that a little bit. There's three key things about traditional Medicare that I don't think people really appreciate enough. And the first is the barriers to care that don't exist, and the broader networks that are really one of the most differentiating things about traditional Medicare. It's also remarkably lean and efficient, and I'll show you some data about that. And to me as a physician, and hopefully to you too, the most important thing that I'll show you is how incredibly effective it is at improving the health of our seniors and people with disability. And I'll show you a little bit of data about that. So any of my charts like this one is about that has numbers on it. There will be a footnote at the bottom that gives you sort of a public domain, peer-reviewed kind of source. So kind of where I'm getting the data from. And one of the biggest differences in traditional Medicare versus Medicare Advantage is the issue of who controls where you go for care. So while you're within the sick benefit payout portion of your retirement life, as I mentioned in your program, you have more choice with some barriers. But when that expires and you go to the marketplace to purchase this stuff, which happens a few years, 10, 15 years for a lot of folks after they retire, they exhaust that fund, then you'll be in the marketplace and you'll be dealing with this stuff that I'm about to show you. The first is that most physicians across the United States accept traditional Medicare as a payment model. Actually, 90%, 89% of adult medicine physicians say, yeah, we'll take you if you have Medicare. It's not as many that would take new Medicare patients, because a lot of physicians, frankly, don't take new patients. But in terms of overall, you can go to nearly 90% of physicians anywhere in the country, in Florida, if you're on vacation from the wonderful Wisconsin winters or whatever. Surgeons, almost every surgeon accepts it. And as I was sort of mentioning, it's a national network. It's not, a regional or local network. So you're traveling around the country, you can go anywhere. Medicare Advantage is quite different. Far fewer physicians participate in any Medicare Advantage plan. So actually you'll see fewer than a third of cardiologists in the United States, around the country, fewer than a third of them are in any Medicare Advantage plan. So if you exhaust your sick payment time and you're at the part where you're now choosing your plan on the marketplace, and you go into Medicare Advantage, 2/3 of cardiologists will say, no, you can't see me. I don't take that as a payment model. And then, of course, in contrast to the national network of traditional Medicare, most Medicare Advantage networks tend to be local or regional, perhaps, and not as broad. So what's the main thing we want from Medicare in general? It's to control the cost of healthcare. We want them to control the cost of healthcare. And so here's a 10-year period looking at how well they've done that. So commercial insurance companies, like Medicare Advantage firms, commercial insurance companies have seen more than a 50% increase in per person spend, more than a 50% increase in per person spend over this 10-year period. That's, dramatically higher than inflation has been. Medicare, and this is Medicare altogether, traditional plus Medicare Advantage altogether, Medicare has had an inflation rate that's less than half of that, with traditional Medicare being even lower than Medicare Advantage. So Medicare does a phenomenal job at controlling the cost of healthcare, and it does this in a remarkably efficient way. As I mentioned, a 2% overhead, phenomenally better than with Medicare Advantage. And then the last key thing about Medicare that isn't widely appreciated is that it makes us healthier. And this, I believe, is my wonkiest chart, but it's still before noon, so you can handle it. So you know, before I started talking today, probably, that American life expectancies are 3, 4, or even 5 years shorter than the life expectancies of other modern nations around the world. Our lives are cut short, essentially, compared to these other countries. And so you knew that. That's kind of depressing. So here is that data, actually our mortality rate, but I think of it as life expectancy. Here's our mortality rate ranked against 17 peer nations. And this is where you want to squint your eyes and you can read the countries at the bottom. Italy, Japan, Norway, Portugal, Spain, there's a list down there. So here's our ranking of mortality rate against 17 peer nations, stratified by age, with kids all the way to the left and seniors all the way to the right. And the no surprise part, based on you knowing that our lives are cut 3 to 5 years shorter, the no surprise part of this chart is that there we are, merrily holding up the bottom of the curve, worst out of 17 peer nations, despite the fact that the United States spends twice as much per person per year on healthcare. Despite that, we are at the bottom of the chart in terms of what we get in terms of life expectancy, until the magic happens, as I think of it, and we turn 65. And then country by country and year by year, we climb to literally the best in the world. Literally the best in the world. So we should be enormously proud of the American healthcare delivery system. We obviously have many of the world's best doctors and hospitals and pharmacists and such, or we couldn't possibly be doing what we do. The problem is, the barriers to care that we have exhaustively before age 65, and then in some cases after 65. It's the barriers to care that are really our problem. So Medicare Advantage is growing, despite what I was sort of alluding to, and we'll show you more about. Medicare Advantage is growing. A few weeks ago, we found that it's crossed the threshold and now is 50% of people in Medicare, or eligible to be in Medicare, are now in Medicare Advantage. They've chosen to do that. And Congress interprets that as evidence that seniors and people with disabilities are consistently satisfied with Medicare Advantage. And some are, I'm quite sure. But Congress interprets the growth and market capture of Medicare Advantage as proof that seniors like that. They may as well have just said it directly, that MA is growing because it's better and seniors love it. Well, that's not the only way to look at those numbers. And one of my favorite humanoids, Dr. Don Berwick, who was a former head of Medicare for a while, he said that that's really not the only reason why it's growing. And he said, as an example, let's say an ice cream firm offered ice cream for free because the federal government were subsidizing that particular ice cream firm. Let's say there was a free ice cream out there. Well, its market share would, of course, grow against the other companies that have to charge for ice cream. So its market share is growing, not because it's better ice cream, but because it's free ice cream, because of the subsidy that it gets. And indeed, that's the case. Indeed, that's the case. Forever, Medicare Advantage plans have been consistently paid more per person than the same person would cost within traditional Medicare. Medicare Advantage is paid more, 4, 5, 6 or more percent higher than the same person would be paid within traditional Medicare. And these are probably, this is probably literally the tip of the iceberg at how they're overpaid. Some estimates are dramatically higher. The most conservative estimate, even agreed to by Medicare Advantage firms, usually is this. So they're paid more, hence they're able to offer a few more things and grow market share for it. How do they do this? What's the business of them? The first is fraud. It's rife within Medicare Advantage, including accusations of fraud and settlements for fraud within United and most of the other ones. And also, as we mentioned, since they're paid a flat dollar amount, more or less per person, they want the healthiest who don't actually expect to have healthcare claims. That's why you'll see the advertisements for gym clubs, or you'll see extra richer benefits that are designed to attract healthy people. Because, if you're 95 years old and need home oxygen and such, offering a gym club is not going to influence you about joining Medicare Advantage versus Medigap. So that's called cherry picking, offering things and advertising in ways that attract the healthiest, although you're paid on the average. And then likewise, they don't want you if you're sick, which is why most Medicare Advantage companies don't include the tertiary care hospitals in their networks, because who wants a tertiary care? Who's going to look at the hospital network to decide whether they want Medicare Advantage or Medigap and make their decision based on a high-end cancer care center? Those are the sick people, and the Medicare Advantage companies aren't silly enough to include those hospitals in their networks because they don't want the people that want those hospitals. And then the last is a whole series of games where the Medicare Advantage firms want to make you look sicker than you are. It's called upcoding. So they're paid by diagnoses. So the more diagnoses they can rack up, the sicker you seem to look. And then the more that per capita capitation that they get they get paid more from Medicare to take care of you if you look sick. Well, maybe that's the way it should be. If you're sicker, maybe that's right. But there's a whole industry of how to upcode, how to make you look sicker than you are. They'll send a nurse out to your house to kind of rack up diagnoses that are completely unimportant clinically, don't cost, but they'll be able to get a higher reimbursement. So there's a number of strategies and actually a large industry about how Medicare Advantage firms upcode. And that's huge. That drains billions of dollars from Medicare, just the upcoding, not the other three things, not the lemon dropping and cherry picking and fraud. Just the upcoding is worth billions of dollars and has been, is projected to continue to get worse. Just that one game. Do we get anything from this? Well, Kaiser Family Foundation says, no, we don't. The Medicare Advantage industry has never generated savings. And in fact, it's always been the opposite. Is that a lot of money that they overbill, or is it a little bit of money? Well, look at these other things that are in the federal budget, each of which are often contested, right? Should we continue the children's health insurance program that, comes up for big fights? Let's cut back on this, that, or the other thing. Well, the overbilling, just the overbilling, not any of the other stuff, just the overbilling is worth more, or it costs the federal government more than, these other programs do in total. So it's a big deal. It's a lot of money. But should you care about that? Should you care about that as a beneficiary? Of course, you care about the country, but as an annuitant or as a beneficiary, should you care? Well, it turns out that people in traditional Medicare who have Medigap, you have to have Medigap unless you're willing to risk bankruptcy, about 12% of them say they have trouble accessing care due to cost, whereas nearly 50% more, actually more than 50% more, 19% of people in Medicare Advantage say they have difficulty accessing care because of the cost of care. So, that's not great. They tend not to use the Medicare Advantage patients tend not to use the cancer care, the top ranked cancer hospitals. These are, if you have an appendectomy for appendicitis or gallbladder surgery, probably most hospitals in the country have surgeons who are highly skilled at these common, relatively simple, not always, procedures. And you don't have to go to the tertiary care center. But if you have one of these things, if you need to get part of your lung removed or your colon or your stomach or, any of these, these things, if you can at all do it, you want to do it at a cancer hospital that's top ranked and has experience with it. And it turns out Medicare Advantage patients are much less likely to use one of those places because of the network issues that we were talking about, or yeah, you can still get it paid for, but you got to prepay with us and then negotiate getting reimbursed by your Medicare. And it's craziness. So as a result, the Medicare Advantage companies don't want you there. And indeed, you wind up not going there. And even for simpler things, it turns out if you're having your hip replaced or your knee replaced or anything that you really might need rehab or home health care, you are significantly less likely to be able to get those things if you're in Medicare Advantage versus if you're in traditional Medicare. And you all know, if you have a stroke, your access to rehab and to home health is really, it's the difference between you being able to walk and talk later and not. So, it's really worrisome, and it's really worrisome. Even more worrisome about the cancer patients, perhaps, is again where you go. If you have any of those cancers, you are again much less likely. Below the white line here means much less likely. So you're much less likely to use a teaching hospital versus if you were in traditional Medicare. You're much less likely to use a National Cancer Institute cancer center. You're much less likely to go to a high volume hospital for these things, and you are much more likely to have a delay in treatment. And understand, a delay in treatment, that can be the difference between stage 2 and stage 3, between survival rates. And indeed, that plans out so that people in Medicare Advantage have higher 30-day mortality rates compared to people in traditional Medicare. All that together is why people in Medicare Advantage tend to want to leave during the last year of life. When you're younger, even as a retiree, you're not as focused on this, but during your last year of life, you really care. Sorry. And so during the last year of life, we see people much more likely to want to leave Medicare Advantage and to go back into traditional Medicare with Medigap. And that's why, and this is why, it's because they say they have difficulty accessing the specialized care, which the Medicare Advantage companies, frankly, don't want you to, they don't want to solve that problem. They don't want you to be accessing that care. And the marketing, I thought about whether I should show you this piece, but it's really important, especially, when you exhaust your sick payout time and you're going to the marketplace. And what do you do? What do you do? That's who these ads are looking at. And the Senate Finance Committee, November last year, produced this report exposing tremendous deceptive marketing practices in Medicare Advantage. And I'm not going to show you all of them. I'm going to tell you about a couple things. The first is this one. You'll get things like this in the mail from Medicare Advantage. And if you're like me, you look at that and it looks like a tax form and you go, shoot, I better fill it out, fill it out and send it in. And it even says there, Medicare Savings Program. It looks like a tax form. It is not a tax form. It's not from the federal government. And someplace in fine print, it'll say this is not from the US government. And instead, you fill this out and you are connecting yourself to a Medicare Advantage enrollment process. That's in the Senate Finance Report as an example of misleading advertising. And so who do you turn to? Do you turn to your insurance agent? A lot of us do. About a third of people trying to decide between Medicare Advantage and Medigap will turn to an insurance agent. And they think that, the insurance agents almost all say, well, I cover all the products. So it doesn't matter to me. I'll tell you all the things, you make the decision. They'll almost all say that they're non-biased like that. Is that really true? Are insurance agents really non-biased? Well, maybe they once were. Not so clear anymore. They get, of course, a commission for enrolling you in whatever you sign up for. If you're in if they sign you up for Medicare Advantage, they may get about $500 that first year just for your having made that decision. It's a growing number. If you sign up instead for Medigap, the insurance agent gets a little more than half of what you were getting. And this keeps going on. It's not just that 1 year. Once a year, they'll probably call you and say, hey, how you doing? You want to go to cheeseburger? Yeah, I'll call you back. And, they'll maybe, hey, I looked at things. They don't look too bad. Let's stay the same. They'll call you, maybe have a 3-minute conversation. And then you'll stay connected to them. And every year for at least 10 years, they'll continue to get something, I think about half of these commissions. So they sign you up and you're a money train for the insurance broker. So yeah, they want to push you into the right direction. And the Part D benefit, the drug benefit, they won't, they don't get much for that. So that's really interesting to me because you'll talk to your insurance broker and ask them for help on picking all this stuff. And the insurance, and you get to the drug benefit, they'll say, they won't tell you their commission. They'll say, well, just go to Medicare.gov. They've got a really good chart there. You can just, pick them. It's really easy to use. You navigate it yourself. You can do it. It's really easy. Let me know if you need any help. They'll tell you about the drug benefit. I'm here because they don't want to spend the time with you. It's not worth anything. I'm here to tell you that the same thing applies to Medigap versus Medicare Advantage. They could just as easily, and indeed 2/3 of seniors don't use a broker. They could be saying to you, oh, thanks for calling. Yeah, but you don't really need me to help you with that. You don't need me to do my core business. They're not going to do that. Instead, they'll walk you through it and they'll sign you up and they'll get the commission. But the tools on Medicare.gov for making these choices are as robust as they are for the drug benefit that they won't help you with. So, you can't just rely on this, and you can't rely on what they tell you. CMS, which is, as you know, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, Medicare, basically, last year did a secret shopper survey of insurance agents and found that almost 80% of the calls they did, the person doing the secret shopper call was giving inaccurate or grossly insufficient information. And I mentioned that part of my background was working in the pharmacy benefit universe. So this particular example in the Senate Finance report, in the CMS report, struck out to me, where the insurance broker told the patient, yeah, if your drug that you want isn't on the drug formulary, don't worry, your doctor just tells the plan and the plan will just add it. That's hooey. That's malarkey. That's not how that works. So the things you get, so you call up the broker, they seem really nice and they really are. Some of them, are probably quite ethical and good, but they have a very conflicted interest and you don't need to work with them. You can't rely on the information that they tell you. To step back a little bit, Medicare Advantage really opened the door to profiteering and raiding the Medicare trust fund. So I showed you that traditional Medicare has a 2% overhead and of course no profit, and Medicare Advantage firms have a 15% overhead and profit mind. So if all that stuff is really real, you can't go to the right hospitals and all those barriers are true, why is it so popular? Why do people sign up for it at all? They sign up for it or for Medigap because traditional Medicare has some flaws. It's hardly the perfect system these days. In particular, you have to pay 20% of all of your outpatient care with no out-of-pocket maximum. If you have traditional Medicare and you have not bought Medigap, you have to pay 20% of your outpatient. So imagine you're going, you go once a year, big deal. You're going, you have something bad and you're going to 2 or 3 doctors a week or a month. That can bankrupt you by yourself. You have to pay $1,600 per hospitalization. And again, if you have something significant, that might be 2 or 3 or more hospitalizations per year. And as I said, there's no limit to how much this stuff adds up to. So if you're sick and you're in traditional Medicare and you don't have Medigap, you can bankrupt yourself. So you don't want to put yourself in that situation. And remember, you're well on Monday and on Tuesday, you got something nasty and you didn't know it. So you can't really predict that. And then the other problem with traditional Medicare is, of course, you have to pay, significant premiums. I have to pay a premium to have Part B. I pay about $200 a month for mine. You have to pay a premium for Part D. I pay about $50 a month for that. And you have to pay a premium for a Medigap policy. And I pay about $200 a month for that. So, you have to pay those premiums. I pay about $10,000 a year for my wife and myself to have Medigap and Part B and Part D benefits, $10,000 a year. I'm a retired physician. I can pay that. But if you're living on $50,000 a year, $10,000 a year to have traditional Medicare not expose you to bankruptcy is pretty onerous. So you have 3 choices when you exhaust your sick benefit and you go into the marketplace. You have 3 options. The first is to keep traditional Medicare and do nothing else and risk bankruptcy. The second is to leave traditional Medicare, because you're really kind of leaving it, and go into Medicare Advantage. I said I spent $10,000 a year on the benefit on the Part B and the Part D and the Plan G. But I could have spent nothing. I could, where I live in St. Louis, I could have joined Medicare Advantage for free. Average is $18 per month, but I could have joined it for free and gotten a drug benefit and all of that. Or the third choice is no, do kind of what I did and keep your traditional Medicare and purchase Medigap. You might not be able to do that. And that's what one of the questions to the last speaker was talking about. So there are federal protections for people with pre-existing conditions. That's part of the Affordable Care Act, as you know, if you buy your insurance on the marketplace, if you're under age 65 and you're buying insurance on the marketplace, they can't send you a health survey. They can't raise your rates or deny you selling you a policy through the federal marketplaces or the state marketplaces before age 65 based upon pre-existing conditions. A similar law exists giving you protections for the first 6 months that you're in Medicare Part B. You join Medicare Part B, you're eligible for Part B, you join Medicare Part B, and for the first 6 months that you're there, if you decide you want to apply for Medigap, they have the same protections. They have to issue you a policy if you apply for it. They can't send you a health survey questionnaire. So they give you what's called community rating and guaranteed issue. Community rating, no surveys, guaranteed issue, they have to say yes. So that's for the first 6 months that you're in Medicare Part B, and that's extended to 12 months if you join Medicare Advantage. So after that, those protections disappear. And so after 12 months in Medicare Advantage, if you run into those barriers, if you run into the, gee, but I want to go to that hospital, but I can't afford to go to that hospital, I'm going to go buy Medigap, maybe not. Maybe not. You may not be able to. And most folks don't realize that they're in that position. So there's that federal protection that goes 6 months for Part B and 12 months for if you're in Medicare Advantage. And then some states, actually several years ago, nobody recently, but some states have gone further than that and actually have required guaranteed issue for life for people in Medicare Part B must be able to purchase a Medigap plan. The Medigap plan insurance companies in these 4 states have statutory, or I don't know if it's statutory or regulatory, but they're required to not say no to you, and they're required to say, not only to say yes to you, but to do it to offer you a policy at community rating and without sending you the health survey questionnaire. So you notice, of course, Wisconsin is not on one of those lists. And these states didn't do this in the last 5 years. These states did this a long time ago. Wisconsin is not one of them, but maybe it should be. Maybe it should be one of them. Maybe it should. It's not as straightforward. It's a little more complicated than just let's fix this like that. Because of course, if you do have guaranteed issue and community rating, then you probably will be increasing the premium required for a Part B for a Medigap policy for everybody in the state. So there's some issues to think through, but Wisconsin doesn't offer those protections. So let's back that up and compare Medigap versus Medicare Advantage. And I'm sorry, I'm using the nationally available Plan G benefit designs. That's a little bit less generous than the Plan F generous benefit design, which is no longer available. Actually, they closed that to new members, and it's even less generous than your Medigap Plan G examples that you have. But let's compare at a high level. It's not that different. At a high level, no Medigap policy, including I don't think yours, adds any benefits. So traditional Medicare doesn't cover dentistry. It's not built into that. It doesn't cover a pharmacy benefit. It has a certain things it covers, and it doesn't cover purchasing Medigap. Does not add extra benefits. You still have to buy whatever else you want. You want eyeglass insurance, or you want dental, or whatever. Traditional Medicare does not cover that. Purchasing Medigap does not add any of those additional benefits. Medicare Advantage does. If you join Medicare Advantage, almost all of them include some or all of these perks. And if you look at the list on here, as I alluded to earlier, these are things that are attractive to relatively healthier seniors and not really going to help, not really going to attract the most sick of seniors. That's an example of cherry picking. The total package of extra benefits in that box is about $2,400 a year of value. If you used all of those things, that's worth about $2,400 a year on average. And nobody uses all of those things. It's a tiny proportion of that, but more benefits. So Medigap with the Plan G example doesn't win. If you just look at that line, Medicare Advantage wins. Out-of-pocket expenses. If you have the Medigap plan layered on top of your traditional Medicare, you really don't have any out-of-pocket expenses once you've exhausted the deductible, which for Part B is $226 a year. In Medicare Advantage, typically, you do have some risk out of pocket. Actually, there's a federal limit to that, and the federal limit is $12,450 in 2023 for in and out of network caps. And I'm sorry, I don't know what that limit is in your plan, but there's not a pocket limit because it's not first dollar coverage. So Medicare Advantage is the loser on that column. Utilization management, I mentioned this earlier. There's almost never prior authorizations or permission required in traditional Medicare. Some things, very few, whereas Medicare Advantage, that's where you run into this stuff. And these things are not important to you when you're healthy, but they are important to you when you're sick. So again, that's an example of the Medicare Advantage plans. What do? You complain to the Medicare Advantage firm, hey, I don't like the fact that you require this permission. Okay, they'll say, well, you don't like it, get out. That's called lemon dropping. You can't complain. I mean, you can complain, but that's part of the business plan. Okay, they don't like that. Well, they're sick. That's why they don't like it, and we're going to lose money on them anyway. So what we're doing is legal, but they don't like it, so they'll pick somebody else. Traditional Medicare with Medigap, you have the exact same network. You go to see the physician, and the physician bills Medicare and bills your supplemental policy and doesn't bill you. They don't balance bill, nothing of the sort. Once you've exhausted your deductible of a couple of $100, there's no co-pays, none of that sorts. You basically walk into the doctor after that, go get your health care, and then walk out of the door, and you don't even stop. You don't even stop at the billing office. They point you to the exit. And I'm here to tell you, I've been in traditional Medicare with a Medigap policy for 4 years now. And it's like a little miracle. It's just amazing that works, but it's the way it should be. It's the way it should be. Medicare Advantage is a smaller network. And as long as you stay in network in your plan, you have very similar. But when you go to a doctor who's not in the network, as I said, there's some it's onerous for you. You can still go in your current plan. When you exhaust that part and you're on the marketplace, a lot of doctors simply won't accept it, and you'll be having to pay for it. So that's sort of a loser for Medicare Advantage. And then the premiums, you have to pay a premium. As I said, I spend about $10,000 a year for my wife and myself, and that's fairly typical. Whereas Medicare Advantage, I could get it for free, including a drug benefit, and a lot of them will even pay off your Part B premium, so it's free instead of $10,000. And they're able to do that because of the shenanigans I showed you earlier, where they're upcoding and they're for all the other things, make them get overpaid by 5% or so more. And that's how they use the 5%, is they can offer it for free and they do these other things. So for that piece, Medigap is not as attractive. And that's probably, the premiums is probably as far as people get when they're trying to decide which way to go. But I think it's good to know this. It's good to know this. So most folks think, hey, Medicare Advantage is free, I'm going to take that. Or in your situation, Medicare Advantage has a much lower premium that you have to pay, but Medicare Advantage is less expensive than the Medigap policy, or the Medicare Plus, yours is called. Premium is lower if you go into Medicare Advantage. And so a lot of folks think, well, I'm going to go into Advantage for free, and I'll go back if I run into those problems. And they don't realize that after 12 months, they may not be able to get into to Medigap. So I showed you this. Medicare has an overhead of 2%. Medicare Advantage profiteering, in my mind, is 15% overhead and profit, with no evidence that they improve anything. And the supplemental policies have an even higher rate of overhead and profit. I don't know what yours is, but nationally, according to the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, last year, it's 22%. And so I always do the math for myself, it's probably similar for yourselves. So I spend, just for me, I spend $1,000 or $2,000 if I added my wife, $2,000 that I'm paying every year just to do the overhead and profit for my Medigap policy. That's just crazy. It's just crazy. What we should do is fix Medicare so that those things that I'm paying for are part of traditional Medicare. And this money then gets diverted, of course, to investors. It's draining the Medicare Trust Fund. There's even worse programs that I'm not going to unpack for you, but there's this new thing called Medicare Reach, And there's a few other initiatives where the insurance or the intermediary is able to retain 25% of what Medicare pays it on a capitated basis. So these are dreadful programs in my mind that are just raiding the Medicare trust fund and going to be bankrupting Medicare for the future. And if you look at the debt ceiling and all of that stuff that's going on, here's money laying on the table that we're diverting from federal funds into the profit and overhead of these corporations that don't in any way improve health outcomes. They don't improve health outcomes, and they're devouring our program. So what can you do, if you wanted to, sort of take action about this? Well, first, you could fight for those state protections that we talked about, guaranteed issue and community rating. Maybe we try to get Wisconsin to join that. That's not as straightforward as it seems because, as I said, if everybody could go into that when they want to, that means the sicker people would probably choose that, and the overall Medigap premium for people within the state would probably go up if you did that, although not really clear. It's not been done in a long time, but that might be a thing you would want to advocate for on a state level. I think more importantly would be to fix the problem that creates this, which are these gaps in traditional Medicare. We could have a whole conversation about why they exist, why they were created in 1965, but they exist. And we should, one thing you could advocate for, join us, my group, Physicians for a National Health Program, in advocating to close those gaps, put in an out-of-pocket maximum in traditional Medicare. No out-of-pocket maximum is crazy, means you have to buy Medigap. And the ideal out-of-pocket maximum would be zero. Those are just barriers to care. And secondly, some people join Medicare Advantage because they want to get these other benefits. So though it's not a level playing field, those things should be added in to traditional Medicare. And then the third, sort of area of advocacy to work is it's just insane for us to allow Medicare Advantage to drain the trust fund like this. So I don't know if you were tracking this. It was sort of, obscure wonky land issue, but a few months ago this year, CMS, Medicare tried to really change the way they pay Medicare Advantage firms. They were going to cut back on some of these overpayments. From my point of view, a tiny cutback. They weren't going to recapture very much at all of the overpayments, but a tiny cutback. They proposed, we're going to do this. And we supported it. We thought, that's great. It's about time to see you do something. And that was great. And the insurance industry just, they have so many lobbyists. And they put an awful lot of pressure on CMS to make them back down. And so Medicare dropped, more than half of what they were going to cut back on. These lobbyists are real. They're aggressive. Just the pharmaceutical industry employs 3 full-time lobbyists for every member of Congress. Just the pharmaceutical industry, and then the insurance industry, on top of that. So my point, if you wanted to do some advocacy work, is CMS, when they tried to do this year, they kind of did it on their own. There were a few folks kind of helping them along. Congress didn't push them along. There wasn't an advocacy community pushing them along. And I think, they tried. They showed that they were interested, but nobody had their backs. Nobody had wind in their sails. And I think, one of the things we could focus on for the next few years, the next window here, is to rally an advocacy community to try to get Medicare to take care of these overpayments. It's just not fair. So if you want to learn more, I'd recommend you go to this very cool website that we've constructed, protectmedicare.net. It's nonpartisan, just like my outfit. We're nonpartisan. We're a 501c3, and protectmedicare.net is likewise that. Hang on for 1 second. I need to. There we go. Sorry. Okay. I think I can hear you now.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We've been having some technical difficulties, so I'm back on again. Some of the questions that I have for you, Ed, are directed in a part to ETF, and they may have to address these in another fashion later on. First one was, it would be very helpful to clarify that Medicare Advantage plan offered through ETF meets the ETF standard benefit requirements. So it's quite different from other Medicare Advantage plans. This is something we do in Wisconsin. We haven't done it all, though, as you pointed out. It also would be helpful to clarify that even after sick leave benefits are exhausted, ETF annuitants can continue to choose to pay their own money for the choices offered by ETF. So we have a little different plan here that goes, you might not be familiar with. I don't know if you can answer that one or not.
I have a little bit of information on that. I don't have everything about that because, as you said, I'm not intimate in the details with your benefit design. Although Roger was good to send me the 2022 benefit booklet, so I have studied that quite a bit, and I did have a good conversation with Arlene Larson about it. So I have some insight, but I wouldn't take what I'm about to say to the bank, because I'm not rock solid on. Unlike the things I said earlier, I'm not rock solid. But my understanding is when you've exhausted the sick benefit, you're loose from the retirement plan that Wisconsin offers you. When you've exhausted the sick, my understanding, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure when you've exhausted the sick benefit, you are no longer, you can't just buy into the same program that Wisconsin offers. Instead, you're loose out of the marketplace, and you have to shop for Medigap or choose Medicare Advantage in the way I said, going through Medicare.gov and paying that full freight. I don't think you can choose to stay in the Wisconsin program, but please correct me if I don't have that exactly right.
I think we can.
I might be wrong.
Some people choose to leave and then go into the marketplace. And sometimes they can come back too. So I have to turn that one over to the ETF for sure on that one. I think we'll pass. There's the second question's along the same lines. And I think, again, it falls to ETF. I'll mention it here so it's recorded and we can pass it along to them. We don't have to leave the ETF health insurance offerings when we use up our sick leave premium banks. We can choose to pay our premiums directly from the annuity. If we do plan to go off the ETF health insurance to a marketplace, we might have some negative consequences, higher premiums due to pre-existing conditions if we don't switch back to the traditional Medigap plan before leaving ETF for the marketplace. That said, there is a definite concern that the Advantage program overall would be a significant threat to the traditional Medicare.
Yeah, I really can't pretend to have rock solid insight into how the ETF program works. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that part. But the second part of Medicare Advantage being a threat to the Medicare Trust Fund, writ large, that I promise you that's true.
Right. We got a newsletter. Maybe I'll be discussing that in the future. All right, next one I have is UW Courts is different from Medicare Advantage plan, right? And what distinguishes it from an Advantage plan? Again, that's one you might not know the difference on. And again, that would be something for ETF to get back to the constituents regarding it.
I lost the first couple of words of what you said. Is what different?
It's the UW Courts is different from a Medicare Advantage plan. They also have a plan. And
yeah,
the person's not quite sure if they are different or they are not different. And again, that's something they have to perhaps contact ETF directly to get an answer on.
Yeah,
I'm telling them all, so they got it recorded. They can ask later.
Yeah, I look somewhat closely at the Medicare Plus and at the Medicare Advantage option, but there's actually a number of other choices, and I did not look at in much detail at any of the others, so I can't answer that at all.
Next one am I lucky that my Advantage plan doesn't distinguish between in or out of network?
Oh my God, you're lucky.
Okay.
Yes, but my understanding is that even in your Advantage plan, the out of network has a more onerous process for you to get that to be paid for. But ultimately, yeah, even out of networks, I understand yours lets you go even out of network with the same reimbursement rates, just not as easy to get it to happen. And so, yeah, you're very lucky. That's unusual among Medicare Advantage plans.
Okay. Another one for them to consider at.
I'm sorry, one last point on that. That to me speaks really well for how your fund is being administered. The fact that we saw this incredible stability of your fund, from the previous speaker, and you have this kind of benefit design, that's just, it's awesome. It's awesome you're able to do that.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you, John Volker, and others from the past. So how do we get this information out? How do we convince folks not to choose Part C? How do we convince folks on Part C to change to traditional Medicare?
Yeah, I'm gonna go to the Medicare, protectmedicare.net site that I showed you, protectmedicare.net, and there's a whole range of tools there. And folks like me, actually me, I am available if you have other groups you would want to have, a conversation like this. I would be delighted. No charge, it's free, and Zoom, I don't even have to travel. I would be delighted to lead discussions like this elsewhere, in Wisconsin. And there's a ton of resources at the site, protectmedicare.net. It's not .com, it's .net, sorry.
Okay. These aren't exactly questions on some of these. I have past employer offers retirees this advantage plan. My plan is not through Wisconsin. And also my plan has no routine vision or dental benefits. This is a comment by this person. I don't know if that has, I think he would have to go to your site and he might be lucky. I don't know.
Yeah. Most Medicare Advantage, I think 99% of Medicare Advantage plans include dentistry, or eyeglasses or hearing. Most of them include some of those. But then again, you have to look closely at that benefit that they offer. The dental benefit usually is limited to no more than $1,000 per year, which is 2 or 3 tooth cleanings. If you actually need dental work, it doesn't help you at all. The eyeglasses, it may or may not be the kind of eyeglasses that you would want. Some benefits don't even include hearing exams, let alone hearing aids. So, there's wide variation on these extra benefits that Medicare Advantage plans offer. And if you have one that offers, robust services along those lines, that's great.
Thank you. The next one is a comment. It would be helpful to ETF annuitants to remember what John Volker just explained. During open enrollment each fall, ETF annuitants can choose any of the ETF health plans available to them. There is no problem changing away from the ETF Medicare Advantage plan. So it is a choice we are offered.
Terrific.
Another one is, I'll answer that one last. The next one is, does the AMA continue to be a lost cause in advocating for Medicare improvement, or have they shown improvement?
Yeah, so AMA is interesting. 40 years ago, most doctors were in the AMA. Today, most doctors are not in the AMA because medicine's become much more specialized. So most doctors instead are in, there's an AMA-like organization for internists called the American College of Physicians. There's an AMA-like organization for family medicine docs or for neurosurgeons. So most physicians nowadays belong to their specialty organization, and the AMA's, representation of physicians is much smaller. And the reason I'm bringing this up is well, twofold. First of all, that doesn't mean that their voice is any smaller. They're still sort of like the brand name. But secondly, they recognize this as an issue for them. And so they've been more receptive to the voices of medical students than they used to be. And the medical students who are raising their voices in the AMA are transforming it. So that there was an event 3 years ago, I think it was, at the AMA annual meeting where, the AMA, for example, has been a strong voice against Medicare for all and improving Medicare. They were one of the biggest members of a PAC that was fighting against that. The medical students had major events outside of that meeting. And I think a week or so after that annual meeting, the AMA pulled out of the PAC that was fighting against these improvements. So, the shorter answer is, yeah, I think there might actually be hope. They do seem to be trying to listen. On the other hand, they've got a long way. That hope is for a long way off. There's a lot of things they have to work on, but they do seem to be paying attention.
Okay. Thank you for that. The last one is actually for our webmaster. Will this be available to watch again online? And if so, where? It'll be on our Wisconsin Coalition of Annuitants.org website. So it's WICOA.org. And you can watch there. I don't know how soon it'll get posted, but we do post the meetings after that. And thank you, Ed, for your timely discussion and comments on where we are. It's a scary thing that we do need to get a grip on. So that's it for me, and that's my last question. So thank you again very much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the invitation, and good luck with things.
We may be back in touch. All right.
And
Rick,
again, thank you, Dr. Weisbart. Very good information, very informative. So,
Diane?
okay, so the final part of our conference today is the presentation of the Blair Teston Award. For those of you that don't know, Blair Teston was a legislative staff person who staffed the Joint Survey Committee on Retirement Systems and the director of the Retirement Research Committee. And because Blair was so helpful to the Wisconsin Coalition of Annuitants, it was decided to present an annual award to an individual or to persons deemed exceptionally significant in the maintenance, operation, or enhancement of the WRS. This year's award goes to Sandy Drew. And Sandy has garnered her experience from her 32 years in Wisconsin public service, retiring from SWIB, where she served as the agency's liaison with the legislature and groups representing members of the Wisconsin retirement system. In addition to her time at SWIB, she administered the state's campaign finance laws with the Wisconsin Elections Board, served as policy analyst and legislative liaison for the Office of the Commissioner of Insurance, and is the Director of Legislation and Planning for the Department of Employee Trust Funds. I could go on, but Sandy truly embodies the spirit of the Blair Teston Award. Sandy, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It sounds like I had a hard time holding a job with as your brother. But I'm very appreciative of the coalition for giving me the Blair Teston Award this year. For those of you who did not know Blair, he was a true delight to work with. He worked for many years as a legislative staff person and worked closely with the coalition, with the agencies, and with representatives of various groups representing public employees. He had a very hearty laugh, and John used a term in his presentation today that made me think of Blair: common sense. And that was the way that Blair dealt with presenting and explaining the retirement system to new legislators, getting their support to keep it the system that we enjoy today. And this is the plaque that I received today from my colleagues. My last thing to those who are watching, if you are a member of a group of retirees in your neighborhood, wherever in the state you are, consider contacting the coalition to become a member to keep the coalition going, and to in years in the future, and to make the others aware of the work the coalition does, and also how to keep the retirement system strong for future retirees. Thank you again to my colleagues for granting me the award this year. Goodbye, everyone.
Congratulations again, Sandy. Well deserved. Okay, so this brings us to the end of our second day of the conference. I want to thank everyone for attending this virtual Coalition of Annuitants conference. And please take a moment at the end of this session to complete our brief survey. So when you press the red Leave Meeting button, you'll be directed to the survey. Completing this survey will help us with planning future informational meetings. Thank you again for attending, and have a wonderful day.